Hey there, how's it going, everybody? In this video, we're going to be learning how to create a web portfolio and a resume using Python and JSON. So this is the process that I personally use to update my own portfolio and resume, and I think a lot of you are going to find this useful. So if you only have a resume and don't have a web portfolio with a URL that you can send to a potential employer, then I think you're really limiting yourself in terms of who you might be able to get your information in front of for potential jobs. But having multiple versions of something like this can be a bit of a pain when you want to make updates. So in this video, I'm going to show how I use Python and JSON to create both versions of these from a single source of data so that they're never out of sync and you don't have to go in and update each of those manually. You just have to update your JSON file and both of them get generated simultaneously. To show you what I mean, let's look at the finished product of what we'll be creating in this video. So a while back in my community tab, I asked you all to send me in some examples of your current resumes, and I took a lot of inspiration from those in order to create a template of both a web portfolio and a resume that I think is going to work for a lot of you. And I'm just using a custom CSS style sheet that I created to style this. So if you don't necessarily like the style and you know some CSS, then this should be super easy for you to update and add your own customizations. And even style it completely from scratch if you'd like. With CSS, you basically have unlimited styling options. So here we have the web portfolio, and this would be something that you'd host on a website that you can send to employers. These are usually a bit more relaxed than a traditional resume and allow you to show a bit more of your personality. So here you can see that I have a couple of social media links in here. There are some images further down. I list some hobbies and interests and things like that. And I also styled this to be responsive. So if we resize this, then it should respond accordingly and look good on smaller windows as well. So on mobile or desktop. Now, with this same data, I also generated a more traditional looking resume that's using a stripped down version of that same data. So this is this here. And we can see that this resume is more traditional and more in line with what companies expect to see when you send them a resume in PDF or print form. So I've taken out the social media links, I've removed the images, and we don't have things like interests or hobbies or anything like that. I think it's fine to put interests or hobbies in some traditional resumes if you have the room. But for this example, I just wanted this to fit onto a single page when we printed this. So if I go to print this, then we can see that this fits nicely on one page, and we can also easily save this as a PDF. So that's the portfolio and resume that are both generated within Python. Both of them are static HTML files, which means that they don't need any backend code to serve them up and are also a lot easier to deploy. So let's take a look at the data that was used to generate these pages, and then we'll go over the Python code that ties all of this together. So let me bring up my VS Code here. So I have a lot of these files already created here, and all of the code from this video is going to be available on my GitHub, and I'll leave a link to that repository in the description section below. So first off, let's look at the JSON file here. So this is called portfolio.json. Now, this is the format that I use for my personal portfolio and resume, but you can change this depending on your needs as well. The whole point here is to make something that works easily for you, whatever that is. But you can see here that this is basically just a JSON that holds a bunch of information that you might find in a portfolio. So we have our name, we have our contact information, here we have our social media links. For anything that has an image, I put a relative path to that image. So you can see here that I have some SVGs for the social media links, and those SVGs are located in the IMG image folder. Then as we go further down here, I just have these different sections broken up in a way that they're most useful to me. So I have my work experience, and that's a list of different JSON objects for each of my previous jobs. And every object has the company name, my position there, start date, end date, a summary, and things like that. And if I scroll down a little bit further, we can just see some more information that we might want to show off. So I have some projects here. If I go down a little further, we have some volunteer experience, our education history, and things like that. Now, I should mention that as I was making this video, I was curious if anyone else did their resumes and portfolios like this, and I stumbled onto a site called jasonresume.org, and they have an open source standard that they've come up with for JSON resume data. And it's a bit different than how I have mine set up here. But if you're interested, I'm going to leave a link to that page in the description section below so you can see that the way that they structure theirs. They do a lot of similar things to how I have mine set up. And after looking theirs over, I even took a couple of their ideas and implemented it into mine here. Okay, so that's the data that we're working with. The next thing that we need is an HTML template for how we want this data to be presented. So I have two templates. One is for our web portfolio, and the other is for our more traditional resume. And again, we're going to be using Jinja 2, and some of you have probably seen what Jinja 2 templates look like if you've ever worked with Flask. It's similar to the templating language used in Django as well. So let me pull up these HTML templates and show you what these look like. So we can see that this looks pretty much like a normal HTML file. Since I was putting this code out there for others to use, I updated this to use modern HTML where I could and tried to keep things, certain things in mind when designing this, like keeping it as simple as possible and also adding in some things that can help with SEO, accessibility, and things like that. And I've also added in comments throughout here so that we can understand exactly what's going on and why each piece of this HTML code is in here. Now, the big difference between this template and a normal HTML file is that we're going to use these placeholders throughout to specify where we want certain things from our data. So for example, we can see that the title for my web page here has this name within braces and then this hyphen portfolio. So when our template is populated with our data, this name placeholder will be replaced with the name that's in our data. So right now I just have this sample file, so that is just your name. So this is going to say your name dash portfolio for the title of that page. And really, it's almost as simple as that. Now, it can get a little bit more in depth. So for example, we might want a conditional where a certain part of the HTML is only generated if the data exists. So if I scroll down here a bit, right here, then we can see here that we have a conditional where I only want this image created if there is an image path in the data. So that makes it so that some of your data can be optional. So if we leave the image path blank, then it'll just skip over this part of the HTML and leave out an image. And these Jinja 2 conditionals have their own syntax, so that we can see here that these have these braces and then percent signs to open it up. And then we have our if statement, and we're saying if image path. And then all of this is within the conditional here. And then down here at the bottom, we have to close out with this end if. So that's the basic syntax that you're likely going to see when working with Jinja 2 templates. Now, it doesn't get much more complicated than that. If I scroll down here, we can see that we have a for loop here. So I'm looping over the social media links here. I'm just saying for link in social media links, and then creating some HTML tags for each of those. And then down here, instead of end if, I'm doing an end for. Now, you're most likely not going to be doing anything too complicated in these templates. If there's anything too complicated that you need to do, then I recommend doing that in the Python script before passing it to the templates if possible. But sometimes we will want to filter out our data just a bit. So for example, I have one example here with our phone number, and right here within the braces for the template, I'm saying that I want the contact.phone number, And then I'm using this pipe character here, and that pipe character is a Jinja filter operator, and that allows us to run some methods on our data. In this case, I'm just removing the replacing the hyphens and replacing them with an empty string so that only the digits are left in this HTML code here. And that's really about as complicated as it gets, at least for this example. Now, if I scroll down here a bit, then I don't think there is much more. I think there was, let me find it here. I think it was with the SVGs. Yep, right here. I'm just marking this as safe because we are putting in some SVG data that we actually have saved on our local file system. And we're just telling it that this is safe so that we're protecting ourselves from some cross-site scripting. Otherwise, any type of code or HTML that you try to put into your templates, it's going to get auto-escaped, which is a good thing because we don't want things being injected into our HTML files. So really quick, we actually haven't looked at the template all that much yet. So let me just go through and point out a few things here. So we just have our header here. And in our header, we're going to have things like our name, our contact information, our social media links, and a summary. And then down here in the main part of the page, that's where we get to things like work experience and looping over all those, and then our projects and looping over all of those, volunteer experience, references, and then in my sidebar here, that's where I'm putting the information for education, skills, languages, interests, and that is it. At the bottom, I have a copyright tag there. So that is the entire HTML template for the web portfolio. And you can have as many different templates as you want. So I also have a template for the print version of this resume. So if I open this up, this is resume_template.html. So in here, we're going to have a few differences. Some of these HTML headers are going to be the same, which, as I'm saying that out loud now, probably means that it should be in its own template so that we're not repeating ourselves. But that's something I could perhaps add later on. Anyways, let me scroll down here to see what's different. So one of the main differences here is that I have this main.css style sheet that I use in the portfolio template, but I'm also adding this resume.css style sheet that overwrites several of those styles to make them more printer friendly and also styles it with a more traditional look that we are going for with this more traditional resume. And this template's also going to be a lot shorter because I'm not using all of the data from the JSON. This one is meant to be more stripped down, so it doesn't have the images. I'm not including those. And some of the extra sections like interests and things like that aren't included here. Okay, so now we've seen the JSON data and both of the templates that we're working with. Now let's look at the Python script that bridges both of these together. Now, I already have this written out, but we'll go over this to make sure that we know exactly what it's doing. And then I'll show you how I can drop in my own personal data and images and generate some pages for myself. So first of all, to get this to run, you're going to need to install Jinja 2. And you can do that with a simple pip install Jinja 2. And at the top of the script here, we're importing a few things that we're using from the standard library. And then from Jinja 2, we're importing environment and file system loader to set up our templating. So the first thing we do is we load in our JSON data using json.load on that portfolio that we saw earlier. And this will load in all of that data as a Python dictionary. And since this is just a Python dictionary, if we need to add any additional information after we loaded in the JSON, then we can do that just by adding more key value pairs. So for example, right here, I'm adding the current year to our data because in the portfolio template, I have it generate a copyright tag automatically using the person's name in the data. So generating this year dynamically should always give us the right year for that tag. And also here for the social media logos, I just have the path to the SVG file listed in the data. But to embed the SVGs directly into the HTML, what I'm doing here is I'm going to open those SVG files and store the content into a new key called SVG data. So basically, just to walk through this, all I'm saying is if we have social media links, then loop over all of those links, and then we get the SVG path, which is the file path, open that, and then we are going to read in the contents of that file, and then add that to a new key value pair within that link called SVG data. So that allows us to keep our JSON nice and clean without putting in the full contents of the SVG data in there, and just putting that file path, and then just adding that in here in the Python after we read in that file. So adding extra stuff to the data like this before passing it into the template might not be something that you need to do when working with Jinja templates, but just in case you do, I wanted to have a couple of examples in here just so we could see what that looks like to add to our data before passing it to our templates. Okay, so now we're ready to pass our data to those HTML templates that we saw earlier. So to do this, we're going to create a Jinja environment, and then we are using the file system loader to tell Jinja to look for our templates in the current directory, which is what this dot here is. Now, if your templates are located in a different location, then you can specify that here. But for this project, I have the Python scripts and the templates in the same directory. And we are also enabling auto escaping, like I mentioned before, to help protect against cross-site scripting attacks by automatically escaping HTML in our output. And this is all we need to do in order to set up our Jinja 2 environment. Now, if you've used frameworks like Flask, these environments get set up automatically for us. But when working with Jinja 2 directly, like we're doing here, then this is usually how we're going to do it. Okay, so now after creating this environment, we use it to get both of our templates with the get template method here. One of these I have located at indextemplate.html, and the other is at resumetemplate.html. And now we can pass the data to our templates to render the final static HTML. So we're using the render method on this index template. And what I'm doing here is I'm unpacking the dictionary and passing that into our render method. Now, if you've never seen unpacking before, then I've added a comment below here to show what this is equivalent to. Essentially, it's the same as passing each key value pair as a separate keyword argument. So it's basically the same as saying name is equal to the value of name within the data, label is equal to the value of label within the data, and so on. And basically, this just makes it to where the Jinja template receives each value directly rather than having to look up each value within that dictionary. Okay, so that render method is going to take that data, pass it into our template, and then generate the HTML. And we've captured that HTML output into two different variables here. So we have our HTML output and our resume output. This should probably be portfolio output. I can change that later. And now with that HTML, we're just going to write these out to two new files. And I called these index.html and resume.html. And finally, at the end of the script here, I have a simple print statement saying that the HTML files have been generated. So if I run this script, then we can see that it says HTML file generated successfully. And since these are static HTML files that got generated, I don't need a web server or anything fancy to run these. I can simply just open these up in the browser directly. So to do this, if I just copy the path of this index.html and go to my browser, then without running a web server or anything, I can just post that in, and we can see that it renders our static HTML for us. And just to make sure that we have both of these, let me replace this index with resume and run that. And we can see that our print version looks good as well. Okay. So we can see that these look pretty good. Now, everything that I've shown so far is what I'm going to ship with the code and post up on GitHub for other people to use if they want. But let me show an example of how someone might do this if they decide to use it for themselves. So with my project here, let me open up my two different locations here. So this is basically the file structure that we're going to see that someone would see if they downloaded this from GitHub. And what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to drop in my own portfolio.json file that has my personal information in it. And I've just labeled that portfolio-Corey- or .json. And then I have some portfolio media here. This is just some pictures and images that I am going to link within that data. So now let me go back to VS Code here, and I'm going to pull up this new JSON file that I just dropped in. And I could have kept this named portfolio.json. I just named it differently to differentiate from what we had before. But we can see that I have my basic info in here. For the image path, I'm using the relative path to a JPEG photo that's in that portfolio media directory that I just dropped in. And for the rest of this, I'm using my own social media links and work history and things like that. So just the things that you would see on any portfolio or resume. So I haven't changed anything else here other than changing this JSON and dropping in that portfolio media with some pictures. So now I can just come back to my Python script here and regenerate our portfolio and resume. Now I did change the name of that JSON file. So just to differentiate between the one that we already had, mine I called portfolio-Corey. I could have left it as portfolio, but I'm going to change that to the new JSON file. And now if I just run this, we can see that it generated successfully. And now if I go back to the browser here, if I reload this, then we can see that it's now using my data from that JSON file and the images that I specified within that directory. And real quick, let me make sure that both versions worked. Yep, and we can see here that it has my name, my information, things like that. So that worked just by changing the data from the JSON that I dropped in. So if I ever wanted to change this, then I can simply update that JSON file and regenerate both of these with that Python script. And that's basically what I was wanting to show you in this video, showing how we can use Python and Jinja 2 templates like this to generate multiple files from the same data. In the last video I released, I showed how we can take a static site like the ones that we've created here and put them online for free using GitHub Pages. That way you'll have a URL to your portfolio that you can send directly to potential employers. So if you want to learn how we could push a site like this up to GitHub Pages, then I'll be sure to leave a link to that video in the description section below. It's one that I just released. Now, one thing that I do want to mention is that a lot of what we saw in this video is a bit opinionated in terms of what works best for me and what I think looks good, but I openly admit I'm not a front-end developer or a web designer, so I definitely encourage you to play around with your own styles and layouts for your templates if you decide to use this method for your own portfolios. I wrote custom CSS for this, but you could always use a framework like Bootstrap or Tailwind if you're more comfortable with those. I mainly want this to be a starting point to give you some ideas for how you can more easily manage your portfolios and resumes. But with that said, I think that's going to do it for this video. I hope you feel like you got some ideas for how you can use a process like this in your day-to-day workflow, even if it's not specifically for portfolio data. But if anyone has any questions about what we covered in this video, then feel free to ask in the comment section below, and I'll do my best to answer those. And if you enjoy these tutorials and would like to support them, then there are several ways you can do that. The easiest way is to simply like the video and give it a thumbs up. Also, it's a huge help to share these videos with anyone who you think would find them useful. And if you have the means, you can contribute through Patreon or YouTube, and there are links to those pages in the description section below. Be sure to subscribe for future videos, and thank you all for watching.